I'd like to introduce our next session on school safety. This is an issue that unfortunately lawmakers increasingly need to address and an issue that teachers and school leaders think about every day. Some states like Rhode Island have passed comprehensive reforms. Other states are taking a more incremental approach to school safety. Remember that no matter where your state stands, ECS has resources to help you understand what states are doing. For example, earlier this year, ECS released 2 reports that look back at new laws passed in 2013. One looked at laws related to school safety, and the other looked at mental health-related laws. They also track other school safety issues in their state policy tracking database. Be sure to check out their website or call them next time you have a question. This is an issue that is important to me and personal to me, as we had a tragedy in my hometown of Sparks, Nevada, where a young student, a middle school student, shot and killed a teacher, shot 2 of his fellow classmates, and then took his own life. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome the speakers. Joining us today, we have Oklahoma Lieutenant Governor Todd Lamb, Jamia McDonald, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Emergency Management Agency, Ken Trump, National School Safety Expert and President of National School Safety and Security Services, and Rich Zeiger, the Chief Deputy Superintendent of Education under California State Superintendent Tom Torlakson. And our moderator today will be Jeremy Anderson. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Governor. And I'd like to get started by setting a little bit of stage for the discussion that we're about to have. On May 20th, 2013, an EF5 tornado swept through Moore, Oklahoma, hitting several schools in its path. Several children were killed in one elementary school. Since 1890, 156 tornadoes have occurred in Oklahoma alone. In the first 6 weeks of 2014, there were 13 school shootings, including one 8-day period in which there were 4 shootings in K-12 schools. It's no surprise that school safety policies are constantly evolving, often in response to fatal events such as these. Our Information Clearinghouse did some research on legislation in 2013 and found that in that year alone, 29 state legislatures passed 44 bills related to school safety. 9 states passed 11 bills amending or creating policies that regulate the presence of firearms or weapons on school grounds, including 2 bills specifically about higher education campuses. 14 bills were passed that addressed school safety plans and what was mandated related to disasters in the states. And 9 states encouraged greater coordination between schools and local law enforcement agencies. This is a very important issue that all of you as ECS members know you have to deal with in your state in one capacity or another. And so what we'd like to start with on a series of special topics around school safety is really a discussion around partnerships. Ken, let's start with you. Communication and partnerships seem to be key in creating successful school safety plans. Partnerships between local law enforcement, mental health experts, state offices of Homeland Security, and schools are just a few of the key players included in state policies. Can you share with us some of your expertise and some of your experiences as you've worked with states on this issue across the country?
Well, I think at the local level, working with school districts, the key thing that we encourage is diversity in terms of your partnerships. At this local school building, that means not only having the principal or the school resource officer responsible for school safety and emergency planning, but also your cafeteria manager, your bus driver, your secretary. Everyone's a part of the team, parents in the community, working with community-based agencies, community-based mental health support, public health, and elected officials at the local level. In the state level, the whole idea of diversity also applies and is applicable. You need to have different voices, different perspectives at the table. For years, I've been a strong advocate in the 30 years that I've worked in this business for a greater voice for law enforcement and homeland security at the table. I will say that that's very important, but in the last couple of years after Sandy Hook, because of all the emotions that it was triggered by the Sandy Hook attack, there have been some well-intended but not well-thought-out recommendations from some areas, particularly from a tactical side, of teaching children to throw things and attack the armed gunman, a run, hide, and fight model, a counter component, and a private-based training that's there. And we think that that doesn't take into fact age and developmental issues. So having the mental health, having the education perspective will help balance those things out. And I think that that's across the board is the important thing of having balance and diversity at the table. There may be some things the law enforcement will see from a tactical end that would make good sense on the street that doesn't make good sense from a educational, age and developmental, and child-centered perspective on the other hand. I think what I would advise, just sort of as a key point, is to make sure you have the proper voices at the table and include people who are on the front lines. While we have many associations, organizations, and professional groups, make sure you tap into your frontline people who are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, who may not always have a voice. And ultimately, there are three questions that I think have to be answered. Number one, when you're looking at policy, programs, and funding, number one is, how will this help a principal better secure her building or his building at the end of the day? What are the implications for implementation, and is it practical to those who are on the front line what we're talking about doing? A lot of times we have a lot of good intentions, but when it gets put into practice, it creates more problems and safety concerns than it helps. And I think Lieutenant Governor Lamb did a great job with his commission in Oklahoma on having those voices at the table. You can probably speak to that.
Jamia, in 2013, you were really instrumental kind of in the response to Sandy Hook, working with legislators to develop legislation that created a model policy for Rhode Island. And it really required that school districts work with not only local police and fire departments, but also conduct safety assessments and emergency plans that weren't in place at the time. Can you share a little bit about how that collaboration worked and how you even brought in some federal participants with the master plan?
Sure. If I had talked to Ken before I did it, it would have sounded very much like I took his advice and implemented it. Rhode Island has advantage by proximity, so we're small. So I'm lucky to have a very engaged House and Senate membership on both sides. So in Rhode Island, what we did, we had legislation that was about 10 years old. And we took a look at the gaps that were in it. And what we found was that there was a spectrum of planning efforts, but not really quality plans. So what we did in our effort was identify the areas that we needed to shore it up. So we had the concept of school safety plans, but we didn't give templates, we didn't give checklists, we didn't give guidance, we didn't give best practices, and to Ken's point, we didn't integrate what's real now, which is Homeland Security. So while we talk about school shootings, we have different threats in Rhode Island. We have natural hazards are our primary issue. So our school safety framework, the plan that we put out, gives the schools the ability to, number one, have a broad framework to look at and reference, and then to tailor it to what their specific needs are. We have schools that sit next to rail, so they have hazmat issues. We have schools that are on the coast. So one of the things I think that we were successful at is giving them the framework to narrow their plan down, and then we built training around how to approach the model plan, but as well as the different stakeholders, right? How do we make the teachers realize and deal with being first responders when they've never really thought about it from that perspective? Or helping the police do consistent tactical training, because in a state like ours, it's always going to be a regional response. And we have a few regional schools. So we took a look at our gaps, and then we also separated the other hot button issue, which is guns. We had two working groups, most of us the same, but we decided that if we were going to make progress on improving school safety planning, we needed to treat it as response planning, and that the issue and policy around gun and gun violence needed to separate itself so that we could deal with both issues and move them.
Lieutenant Governor Lamb, in 2012, you were leading the Oklahoma School Security Institute and having some recommendations with them for your state. Some of that was in response to Sandy Hook, but ultimately, the tornadoes that hit the next year played a part in that also. Can you talk a little bit about how you work to deal with some of the issues, not only around guns, but with the natural disasters and engaging the law enforcement?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And first, I'd like to thank the Commission. I was a little bit unfamiliar with this Education Commission of the States prior to my invitation and arrival here this week, and I learned a great deal. So thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to participate on this panel. I don't want to build you the watch, but a little bit of history and background with me. My background is security. I'm a former special agent with the United States Secret Service. And when I was in the state Senate, prior to being lieutenant governor, I authored the Oklahoma School Security Act. The chairman of the Education Committee in the state Senate, Kathleen Wilcoxon, is here, former state senator, who heard that piece of legislation, was very instrumental on the Senate floor getting that passed in 2008. Representative Van Cootie, who was with us also from Oklahoma, she is the education guru in the State House of Representatives in Oklahoma, and she is a principal reason the Oklahoma School Security Commission was able to enact 4 different pieces of legislation regarding the commission that you just mentioned. Jeremy, because of my background, I've always bifurcated. It's somewhat synonymous with some folks, safety and security. Because of my background, I've bifurcated and compartmentalized safety, fire, tornado, hazmat, flooding, and security, large-scale school violence, and how to mitigate that. After the Sandy Hook tragedy, when I chaired the Oklahoma Commission on School Security, I said, I'll do it on 2 conditions. One, I want subject matter experts, i.e., I want no legislators on the commission, because I didn't want any legislators with skin in the game regarding any bills they had in the legislative pipeline during that commission. The second part, I said, if we have a commission on school security in Oklahoma, I want it to have a deadline. And I don't quote Ross Perot often. If you love Ross Perot, just don't quote him often. But I quoted Ross Perot during this commission many times. I said, Ross Perot said in the 1992 presidential debate, if you see a snake, kill it. Don't appoint a committee on snakes. So we've all been on committees. We understand why. You'll study, you'll analyze, you will think about it ad nauseum, and you won't get anything accomplished. We had a deadline. And we had 22 subject matter experts in Oklahoma, psychologists, school psychiatrists, school counselors, school board members, a pastor, district attorney, school resource officers, principals, superintendents, and classroom teachers. That's who was on this commission. So not just policy wonks and not just politicians, but we wanted subject matter experts, and that precipitated, Jeremy, as I wind down, 4 pieces of legislation requiring the reporting of security and safety procedures that led to the tornado activity and protecting our kids after the commission. Lockdown drills required, reporting of firearms. That's not gun control issue, just reporting of firearms, illegal activity in schools, and some other items I'll be happy to get into later. But we got things accomplished, we got things done because subject matters were involved, and the partnerships, the question you led off with, the partnerships and getting everybody engaged in community and throughout the state.
Rich, some of the changes that have happened in California require each school site to review and update their school safety plans annually, although I think some would say that may not have been happening on an annual basis. These plans usually extend to include not only safety, but also disaster preparedness, emergency shelters, bullying, and more. So can you talk a little bit about some of the online tools the California Department of Education has created to help schools have a truly comprehensive school safety program?
The first thing I'd like to say, though, I want to reiterate: schools, by and large, are safe places.
You're not.
I'm sorry. Am I not coming through here?
I can hear you, but they can't.
Can we get another mic for Rich? And actually, I'll jump to another question. We'll come right back to you, Rich. Okay. So as you look at some of the school safety plans that in many states are actually looked at as crisis plans or emergency response plans, one of the big questions is how you deal with some of the partnership. Law enforcement and school officials don't always agree on where this needs to be done. And Jamie, you're laughing as I say this. Can the 3 of you kind of give some insight on what you found as you were trying to do the implementation of your policies?
I'm happy to jump in on that. So as the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, we had the Police Chiefs Association, the Fire Chiefs Association, our state police at the table from the outset. And again, ours is an advantage because of the size, but I think we also encouraged that it was that they needed to stop functioning in silos. So we let the police spend time and encourage active shooter training with the teachers present so that they saw what kind of tactical response and what their movements were and understood how they behaved. And again, back to the teachers are faced and voiced a lot of concern about being first responders and not what they went to school or ever intended to be. And it also helped police understand the needs of the teachers as they were doing the response. So putting them in the room together and let them kind of air their grievances and their fears and concerns helped us move things forward faster, or at least focus our funding efforts or focus our training efforts to kind of shore up those distances. But it was at times tumultuous, but it moved pretty quickly when they got to address each other directly.
Ken, in other states you've been in, have you seen that same problem with teachers and fears of being considered first responders where there's not sufficient training?
I think we've particularly seen it after Sandy Hook. One of the things that Sandy Hook, because of the young age of the children, really was a punch in the gut. I mean, I'm a father of 2 young elementary-age children. It certainly hit me personally as well as professionally. And we've seen a lot of emotional, knee-jerk reactions since Sandy Hook, perhaps even more so than what we saw after Columbine. After Columbine, we saw a fairly measured response, looking at threat assessment protocols, taking a look at the tactical law enforcement end, school resource officers, mental health support needs, and a comprehensive type approach. In the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of knee-jerk, as I say, people are looking for the wow, but they're not thinking about the how. There was a story earlier today about a new device on the market where you scan your fingerprints. By a former principal created, scan your fingerprint, it automatically sends an alert to the local police department about an active shooter, and it pops open your box where you can grab your baton and pepper spray as a teacher and use that. And I'm scratching my head, and we've talked about bulletproof backpacks. I always ask, if you need a bulletproof backpack, don't you need a bulletproof helmet and front pack to go along with it, and a Captain America shield? So a lot of things have come out emotionally, and I think really the best practices of 15 years ago from Columbine, with those threat assessments, training your people, building relationships with kids who come forward and report when they know something, having their crime reporting, training your school resource officers and your educators, still holds true today. I think the challenge is we have a whole new generation of not only legislators and elected officials in their positions today who weren't there 15 years ago, but also a lot of superintendents, principals, and frontline educators and school officers who weren't. So we need to go back to the lessons learned.
Rich, it looks like you have a microphone now. So can you add a little bit of insight from California's experience and some of the online tools in particular you're providing?
Right. The first thing I want to say, what I wanted to start with, however, is we shouldn't forget that schools, by and large, are safe places. Our experience is that they are as safe or safer than the communities they're in on a day in and day out basis. So we're spending a lot of time talking about this, but I don't want anybody to be afraid that it's not a good thing to send your kids to school. It is a good thing to send your kids to school, and we do take good care of them. That being said, we need to be cognizant of the issues and the problems that are out there in the world. California has a different approach than the other states, because one of the reasons is because we're so big, we tend to do these things bottom up. So we don't have I won't say we don't have any, but we don't have a major plan from the top down about how to do school safety. Instead, we require that each district, and in fact each school, have its own safety plan. Those have to be created at the local level. They have to be done in conjunction with a site council that brings in all the elements, including local law enforcement. And our job is to provide a template for that, which we do on our website, that in essence is a checkbox. And if you go through that checkbox, you're pretty much assured of touching on all the subjects that you need to have in order to work through an effective safety plan. Those have to be updated annually. They're audited both by us and by our county offices of education. And I think in recent years, there's been a lot more attention paid to them. Beyond that, California's adopted a new funding formula that pushes a lot of financing formula, that pushes a lot of money down to the local level. It has 8 criteria that school districts are supposed to be considered, one of which is school climate. And we think that in some schools and in some areas of the state, that may become an incentive for parents and community people to work with their local district to increase resources available for school safety issues, more probably on a day-to-day basis than on a catastrophic basis.
One of the issues that's been talked about a lot is also mental health and how that applies to school safety, whether before or after an incident that might happen. Recent violence in schools and on college campuses has brought sharp focus to the need for mental health issues in education and how we can best serve the students that we are supposed to be taking care of. Ken, you stated in a report, quote, "To be successful, any discussion about increasing school safety must address the issues of mental health." How can states include that in their school safety policies and trainings?
I think that if we look at any school shooting, the common thread that crosses the board really is undiagnosed and or untreated mental health. We can dig through and take the layers off the onion, if you will, over the weeks after an incident. But I always say when I'm doing the talking head news interviews and cable and everywhere else that ultimately when you get down to it, you're going to find some undiagnosed and or untreated mental health issues. I think on the schools end of things, we need to make sure, and in a policy level, you need to make sure that mental health professionals first are at the table and that they have a voice. But it's not one of the things we hear people jump to quickly. Well, we need to teach teachers how to identify kids with red flags. And I will tell you that with more than 30 years of working in the school safety profession, your average experienced second grade teacher can identify those kids that have mental health red flags or who are going to have problems down the line. The challenge and the question is, what do we do with them once they're identified? Now, certainly we need training and making sure we're up to date on that identification. I'm not summarily dismissing that. But the question is, what do we do? And if we look at the elementary school level, where we tend to have the fewest or non-existent resources, we find that oftentimes we find one counselor who's shared across multiple elementary schools, or a social worker, a school psychologist who's dealing with a dozen schools, primarily doing special education testing issues. So the principal gets a referral from a second grade or third grade teacher, and it's either handled with disciplinary action, which is sort of a hit and miss. Child's back in the classroom, the behavior problems are there, the concerns go unaddressed, and these children move forward to the middle school or high school level, and we have a school shooting, we have an incident, and we scratch our heads and goes, geez, how did this happen? And there's a second grade teacher sitting back somewhere saying, could have told you that about 8 years ago. So we need the resources at an early age, but we also need linkages between the schools and community-based mental health agencies. I think we have to put some realistic parameters on what we expect of our schools, particularly on mental health. They are not going to be mental health agencies and be able to solve the entire problem, so they need linkages with community-based organizations, and we've seen some good examples of that around the country. And the last point is making sure that there's some clarity on what can and cannot be shared. There are a lot of myths and misconceptions on what legally can be shared. We see it with FERPA, the Federal Education Privacy Rights laws. A lot of school administrators can actually share on a health and safety issue more than many believe they can share, so they need proper training in that area as well.
Lieutenant Governor Lamb, was mental health one of the issues that you dealt with in your report?
It was, and this is the report. This is the 2013 report of the Oklahoma Commission on School Security, submitted to the governor and the legislature. This is all of the information we received from our expert witnesses before the commission, and I want to give a public thank you to Ken Trump. He kicked us off. I knew if anybody should start our commission with presentation and subject or expert testimony, it should be Ken Trump. Interesting, he started off this interrogatory because he said that to our commission. Mental health is so important. Now, if you think about it long enough, that's pretty common sense in this respect. Nobody in their right mind goes into their classroom as a child and exercises large-scale school violence in the hallway, on the playground, in the classroom. There's something not right there. Well, I want to give you this as a visual to see it's about an inch thick. Probably over half of the presentations we received dealt with mental health in some capacity. As we were going through the process, that's why it was so important to have all these different subject matter experts, particularly a classroom teacher, not just administrators with all due respect, but a classroom teacher, because we were going down the avenue of educating the educator and training the educator for intervention. And then the classroom teacher from Pawnee, Oklahoma, a very small community, she raised her hand and she said, how am I going to do that? Well, what do you mean, how are you going to do that, Tammy? Well, this is what I do at 8 o'clock. This is what I do at 8:15. This is what I do at 9:21. This is what I do at 10:17. This is what I do at noon. This is what I do during recess. And she went through her day. She said, when will I do that? Light bulb went off. So we try to equip and provide training on a volunteer basis to our educators. No requirement from them for accountability or liability, but train our educators to intervene and to look for signs so that they can call another subject matter expert in the school, in the district, to get help to somebody in need but no burden on that classroom teacher. And we got a little pushback initially until we assuaged everybody with the fact that there would be no accountability or concern for liability with the classroom teacher on mental health.
Jamia or Rich, have you seen similar issues around mental health as you've worked on implementation?
Yeah, I know we have. I think this is one of those areas where we still have a lot of work to do. In the recession, we lost a lot of resources, and the first to go out of our schools were often our school nurses and counselors, and we have yet to recover from that and bring those back into the schools. And I want to try to draw a little loop with our first speaker for the conference. When you talk about what matters most often to a student is a teacher that cares. That's exactly the issue we're talking about here, is to have a teacher that cares enough to see something is not right and then has the resources to do something about that. And we have teachers who care, but we're a little short on the resources, I think, and I think that's a place where we need to do some work.
So we got creative, talking about what the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, is back to how do you action it. In Rhode Island, we have what's called a critical incident stress management team that primarily is a first responder asset. So it's only stood up or exercised at our behavioral health department and with our local community partners during an emergency or a large mass casualty event. What we end up legislating is that we give that resource to the schools when asked. So we wrote part of our legislation to provide them access outside of emergencies, statewide, what have you, so that they can get that resource into the classroom for the kind of things they both mentioned, for the training, for the identification. The teachers very early on made it clear to us that we can't legislate or plan around all catastrophes. It's impossible to do that, so give us the practical tools to identify to get help.
Let's continue our discussion a little bit on expansion of some of the drills and how you do the training, but I also want to let the audience know that we will be opening this up, so if you have questions, please raise your hand. We'll be sure to get a microphone to you also. Emergency drills help students and staff prepare for what is unknown, and especially in emergencies, but they're not always utilized to the best degree. Some states are moving away from event-specific drills, such as tornado drills, and are instead requiring emergency drills. We showed a picture on the screen before we started this of a school that was in the middle of an intruder drill. In 2013, 10 states passed legislation updating their policies about school drills. Most of these policies changed the frequency, purpose, or name of the required drills. Lieutenant Governor Lamb, in Oklahoma, your commission pointed out that there was no central repository of all the drills required by schools. How has the state operationalized your recommendation to easily identify and increase requirements for school safety drills?
Well, as I said earlier, the commission was not a commission in perpetuity, but one key piece of legislation from our commission was the creation of the Oklahoma School Security Institute. So now there is a central repository to assist schools, not to big brother schools and not to thicken the red tape and put more burdens and mandates on schools, but to work with schools. Something else we required in Oklahoma, you better do a tornado drill. I mean,
yes.
You're not going to take tornado drills off the books. And because this is recorded and everybody's in the Twitter sphere, I want to say I'm all for the fire drills. Let the record reflect I'm pro fire drill. I'm on the ballot this year, as you can tell. I'm sensitive. But if you look at our nation as a whole, and I think I learned this from reading one of Ken Trump's many books, but when's the last time we lost a child in a fire as compared to large-scale school violence? So we better do tornado drills in Oklahoma, in particular in the Midwest. We better continue with our fire drills because they're very important. But we better start doing intruder drills, and we required that you do them in different semesters. Not just an easy, let's do it Tuesday and Thursday, okay, we're finished for the year. We have a very mobile society. Kids move around a lot, families move around a lot. Parents are transferred. Well, I want to try to catch all the kids we can, so let's do them different semesters in addition to our fire and tornado drills, understanding classroom time is very limited. But we have that central repository working with schools, not trying to play gotcha with the schools.
Jamia and Rich, how has that worked in your states?
For us, we didn't add any drills this year. We had already 15, 14 on the books. So what we were trying to do, back to 11 were fire drills, is how do we use those drills more effectively? Because back to listening about the Teacher's Day or the administrators' program, everything they have going, we've already got a lot of drills. How do we put them into the current vernacular? We've got the hostile intruder going. We've got shelter in place. We're hurricane prone, watching one now. So we didn't add, we just figured out, can we do better? So our model plan talked about ways to use those and leverage those moments in time to try and do different types of activities.
California, of course, is blessed with not having any natural disasters, so we really, unless you count the earth shaking out from under you, we don't have these switches. But and we do drills, we do fire drills, and we do these others, and I think more and more districts are moving to intruder drills, which have become, I think, more necessary. And the last have seemed to become more necessary in recent years. For earthquakes, we do the same drill that we did when I was a kid, which is drop. We do a drop drill because you need to get under some cover. But we've really solved is a little strong, but we've really minimized our issues around earthquakes primarily by planning. We've reinforced our schools or rebuilt them so that they now meet very contemporary earthquake standards. And we haven't had a school fall down in an earthquake, although we've had many earthquakes. We haven't had a school fall down. The other natural disaster we occasionally have is wildfires. But it turns out, again, schools are one of the safest places. They have clear space around them, by and large. And, in fact, they are usually a place where residents who are forced to evacuate go in the case of a fire. We do sometimes close schools in cases of wildfire because kids are being evacuated and they need to stay with their families. But those are our two main issues that we have to deal with on a natural disaster basis. We're pretty much hurricane-free in our state.
Ken, you recommend actually diversifying some of the drills that are required by certain states. Can you elaborate for policy leaders on what type of drills you find are most necessary and helpful?
I don't think that we need to create new drills. We need to become proficient at the drills that we have. And I think Lieutenant Governor hit it on the head of, unfortunately, there are few carrots and no sticks for those school districts who choose not to comply with what is put into law at the state level. There have been a couple of examples in 2 states just recently of investigative reporting showing noncompliance by schools, and in one of those states, the investigative news story actually showed schools in the last month of June, the school year, doing drill day where they did 9 drills so they could check off the box and send it to the state. One school did a drill on Sunday and on Mother's Day, according to their records, and then that they just changed from the year before. What we're working with in schools, so I think the Lieutenant Governor is right on target to have it across. We recommend on lockdowns at least 2, preferably 3, or if you have student mobility issues, but at least 1 across. Typically we say 2, 1 per semester. But at the building level, at the ground level, we're working with superintendents and principals to diversify their drills. You don't need to have a mock hostage simulation the first day of kindergarten class and strip search your children, but you do need to make sure that you're doing simple things with fire drills, blocking an exit unannounced, not just to the kids, to the teachers, because we're also trying to train adults who get into rote behavior and have done the same thing for 20 years. So we're saying do a lockdown during lunch period. The vast majority of school administrators in this country will not do a lockdown during lunch period because it disrupts your back-to-back lunch periods, but that's 1/3 of the school day. Do one during class change. We worked in a school where a kid brought an AK-47 to school, fired a couple rounds in the hallway, and committed suicide during a class change. The kids we talked with told us they'd never practiced during class change and didn't know what to do. So I think we need to have some incentives, some sticks for those who don't comply. I know it's very hard with state-local relations, and I have mixed emotions on, and quite frankly, not an answer on how to do that. But we need to get to the ground. We have school shootings that tend to occur very frequently when they do occur early in the morning, but yet the drills aren't done upon student arrival. So we need to get people to think, and we've worked with some superintendents who actually are now superintendent, assistant superintendent, are walking in the school unannounced to their principals and saying, "Good morning, Ken. do a lockdown drill now so that the principal's not even aware of it. And I think that's important, how to encourage, nurture, and nudge people to diversify within reason, good common sense, age and developmentally appropriate ways.
Do we have any questions from the audience for the panel on this issue? See a couple in the back there.
Yes, I'm Brett Bigham. I'm the Oregon State Teacher of the Year. And we had our own school shooting earlier this month, and that's a school that a third of my classroom comes from. And once again, I see that afterwards, there is a huge amount of money available for counseling for people that went through it. There's money available for the teachers to have counseling. I myself as a teacher would like to see that emphasis switched. I know the school counselors that I'm familiar with have 300 or more students on their caseloads. How is a counselor who has that many kids going to be able to screen for mental illness? However, after the occurrence, there's lots of money to clean up the mess. So I'm wondering if any of you have worked towards a switch in funding and a switch in focus that is trying to collect the information before it happens, because honestly, afterwards is a little bit too late to solve the problem.
So Ken mentioned it earlier, and I'll go back to the Homeland Security thing because we didn't hit it too hard. Part of the reason that we added the assessment is we tried to line it up with critical infrastructure, which is in a Homeland Security type program. So we did the assessment modeled after Homeland Security's critical infrastructure so that we could access those types of funds, because we're going for the all hazards approach, not just physical violence, natural hazards, interpersonal violence. So our attempt at tying the assessment to Homeland Security opens those dollars up for us to deal with those types of issues. That's how we've tried to push that.
And I think you've hit on a larger challenge. You were focused, the microcosm of mental health, which we've all talked about, and you're sensitive to because what has happened in Oregon. But the larger issue, I think, is right after tragedy strikes, everybody wants to do something, and you find some monies somewhere to do something. Well, that's very generic and very general, and that's why in Oklahoma, and this isn't about me, I'm not trying to strain a tricep, pat myself on the back, but because I was engaged, when I authored the Oklahoma School Security Act or when I chaired the commission as lieutenant governor, I mean, by the grace of God, we've not experienced large-scale school violence, but I wanted us to be proactive in Oklahoma and not just reactive. Now, we're going to be reactive when tragedy strikes, like the tornado you mentioned, May of 2013, what we reacted there. Reaction's fine, but you can also think more clearly and have a longer-term vision when you're proactive. And I think that's a larger problem just with school security, because Ken mentioned his children. I have an 8th grader. My wife and I have an 8th grader. We have a 5th grader. My wife's a classroom teacher. She taught for several years in Tulsa and Oklahoma City public schools. Our goal as parents, these are our goals. We want our kids to be really, really smart. So we all do, right? When I say we, that's all. We want our kids to do well on the spelling test, the geography test, the math test. We really pray for those math tests. So that's our goal. But you know what our greater goal is, which is always, it's never stated? Here's our greater goal as parents. We want to pick up our children in the exact same condition in which we drop them off in school, safe and secure. We pour all this money into everything else, but we forget about security. And you're right, schools are safe, they are secure, large, in volume. But we've got to think longer-term vision and not just be reactive with funding, whether it's mental health, cameras, consulting, plans, procedures, but long-term vision with school security and safety throughout our country.
I want to agree with that. I want to make it clear that when we talk about prevention, that's really what we need to be talking about, is doing that kind of work on the front end. If we treated this like in California, if we treated it like we did earthquakes, we rebuilt all the buildings. If we'd actually put that energy into these mental health issues in the front, we would head off, I believe, an enormous number of these kinds of incidents. And it's a much more productive way to use our funds.
I just think that we have to acknowledge that school safety today, and in the 30 years I've been in it, I've seen it increasing. It's a political issue. It's a political issue at the lower level, at the local school district. Anxiety after a shooting, to speak to your question. Parents are in an uproar. The media coverage is intense, sometimes unbelievable in many ways. and we start responding emotionally. And someone said it best recently, said, and I think Lieutenant Governor alluded to that, you have to pull back the reins and be cautious not to follow the policy style of do something, do anything, do it fast. And that tends to be what we tend to do with that, to calm the anxiety, calm the emotions. And while it's well-intended, it often doesn't work and turn out to be something that's meaningful when it's implemented. And that's why I thought that measured response, you talked about that ground level perspective with the Oklahoma Commission. We need to avoid roller coaster public policy awareness and funding and look at having consistency along the way, and we tend to drop that legislatively and administratively at state and local levels.
Got time for one more question. Ms. Brady, go ahead.
Hi.
Can't see you in the light, sorry.
Hello. I'm Dorina Sackman. I'm the 2014 Florida Teacher of the Year, and I thank you, Brett, for saying what you did. One of the biggest experts on mental health, if you would ever like to speak with her, is the New Jersey State Teacher of the Year, Kathy Collins-Sassini. She's incredible and has a passion about it for our students and the future of our students. And because of her, I learned a great deal, and I have some questions about that. With regard to mental health, we still as a society see that word as a stigma. It's very hard, especially as teachers. And the words mental health a lot of times make people uncomfortable. Do you, as your states, have any professional development for teachers so that we may stop that stigma, and most importantly, but also what type of process do you have? Because with all the budget cuts, as Mr. Richard Zeiger talked about, that we have the cuts of our guidance counselors and the cuts for our HOPE and the cuts for our staff, what can we do? What process, when teachers see an issue, even in 8th grade or in high school, what is the process that your states do so that it goes to the right people and that it doesn't get ignored? Because as a teacher, that's what I'm seeing. There isn't a process or a protocol, and it gets slipped under. We'll worry about it. We'll take it to the dean. We'll take it to the dean. That's not what's happened when it deals with mental health. Do you have anything in your states about a protocol for that for our teachers?
So we've got limited time, but it's a good question on kind of protocol and how you deal with it.
I'll go rapid fire quickly, and first I want to say congratulations to all the Teachers of the Year in the room. Apparently there's a lot of them. Thank you for your service, and I'm serious. I mean, at least there are two. I assume there's more. Thanks for your service and what you're doing for our kids, and congratulations on your recognition. I think I've addressed it briefly, not in detail, of course, but stay tuned to Oklahoma, because we have a pilot program right now from the Commission within the Institute, providing training, no accountability or liability with the teacher, accountability but no liability. But we're working on a pilot program right now to do just that with our classroom teacher in Oklahoma.
I know that we've seen in Indiana, similar to what the Lieutenant Governor is doing with the Homeland Security, with the School Security Institute in Oklahoma. The Indiana School Safety Specialist Academy was actually created right after the Columbine shootings, and has been sustained in the state budget it started at $750,000 a year, and it's actually gone down just a little bit, but it's still sustained. Indiana requires a state-certified school safety specialist in each school district in the state, and they're required to have a representative, that specialist, to complete training each year through the academy. It's either out regionally or at the state level. And the curriculum strands are very well balanced, from tactical law enforcement and security, emergency planning, to mental health counseling, the crisis recovery piece. So I think the question, whatever it is that last word, sustainability across the board, and training, because your people are going to change, your administrations are going to change over time, and that's probably the greatest challenge, because priorities change with it.
Please join me in thanking our panel on school safety for their insights.